I just drained all of Darnell's HP with my excellent move.
I can't believe this. Which of the 14 Pokemon moves did you use on me?
String Shot.
That's not even one of the HP training moves. A
I
lower
have a
speed.
special
It's
skill.
not even...
I have a special unique skill that makes all of my moves drain your HP.
It's like a Pokemon ability where every attack drains HP.
Yeah, as a side effect. But
that would actually be really interesting. Yeah.
It's when I interact with anyone, so even my friends I hurt just by being there.
So, well, hear me out. This would be cool. A Pokemon ability that makes every attack have recoil, but also every attack drain. So, like, when you're using super effective moves or, like, doing a lot of damage, you heal pretty good. But whenever you're not doing so much, you're hurting yourself every move, basically.
Interesting. This guy... Game Freak, hire this man.
Game Freak, I'm waiting. Alright, so last time was a lore episode. We went through Chael's backstory of how he climbed his way to the top, quite literally, and then fell, quite literally, and then came back up quite literally again when he Aether awakened. We learned of 2 Aether techniques, Aether Burning and Aether Awakening. And Aether Burning destroys your body, but Aether Awakening destroys your mind. And they both sort of accomplish the same thing, but Awakening seems infinitely, like, more powerful.
Yeah.
But, the ultimate horror for Tanhony is someone losing their mind or emotions, I feel. I feel like that's what you hate the most. Maybe I'm speaking out of my ass. Is that true?
I don't know. Maybe I don't realise that. Maybe that's something you've discovered about me through.
I know that's a thing for my friend Eli. He finds stuff like Kafka or like the Junji Ito, where the guy turned into a snail, like the worst, like when you become something you're not anymore, or like lose your, like you no longer have your sapience. I know that's like the scariest thing to him. I was wondering if it was the same for you. Maybe like the ultimate price to pay.
Yeah, I would say it's maybe more like that rather than me being scared. Yeah. I'm not scared of anything.
Okay.
Except monkeys.
It's something... Actually, I shouldn't get into that. That's too personal. But anyway, we have another chapter for you today. Another banger. Another 9-page chapter. So two longer episodes this week. I guess we might as well get into it. I should stop stalling.
Yeah, I'm trying to sort of get as much content into each chapter as possible to get this finale.
There's literally nothing wrong with it. I'm just like very tired because I had to do shit today. It's not your fault at all. These are good chapters. Or the last one was anyway. I haven't read this one.
No, you
the Chael thing brought... cocky. The Chael thing brought down its great metal fist, shining knuckles aiming right for Skipper. The blades that made up its lower body creaked and snapped from the pressures of movement, but new ones grew to replace them just as quickly. Skipper went to jump out of the way, but his injuries and the exhaustion of battle had taken their toll, and so his leap didn't quite make the mark. He landed on his side barely a meter away, grimacing from the aggravation of his injuries, and looked up to see the fist surging towards him at a desperate speed. "Welp," he thought, oddly calm. "This is it. Never thought I'd get killed by a giant metal monster on top of a spaceship, but these things happen." He went to close his eyes in instinctive response to the death blow, only to open them again wide as a red blur zoomed past his vision. A second later, the fingers of the metal fist exploded into a shower of blades, and the Chael thing retracted the limb in primitive alarm. A rattling groan of anger trickled from the citizen's throat, its sightless head following the red blur as it came to a halt. Ruth planted her skeletal claws into the deck below her as she landed on all fours like a cat, the metal screeching below her as she ground to a stop. Red aether crackled furiously around her, and her hair was blazing just as crimson, as though fire were whirling around her head. She looked up with furious golden eyes, glaring at the citizen with all the anger her stare could hold. "We've got unfinished business!" she growled at the man who could no longer understand her. Skipper took the opportunity the momentary distraction provided, picking himself up off the ground as he clutched his wound. "You took your sweet time," he grinned deliriously. Ruth's eyes flicked towards him, and she smirked. Our driver... Fuck, I don't know what Ruth's voice is. I forgot. What was it? Our driver... I feel like I can't do it. I feel like I can't do it. "Our driver's slow as hell," she said, and behind her, a car rose up into the view. What? Is that right?
That's pretty much it, yeah.
Okay, bobbing uneasily in the air. For some reason, I don't know if it's the new headphones, but I feel like my voices don't sound the same. Everything's like more muffled.
Except for
like,
Skipper.
as...
Skipper cannot be affected.
Skipper raised an eyebrow as he saw the occupants through the windows, and through the gap created by the one missing door. Dragon, Bruno, and Serena, sure, they were to be expected. But the guy in the back seat? The bomber man they'd thought at the Nyang? That was unexpected. Not to mention the driver. The man at the front of the car, a toy Musashi, had his eyes fixed on the chail thing, his brow a crease of severe concern. Skipper couldn't exactly blame him. This was kind of a lot to take in. Still, what was he doing there? Skipper felt like he'd missed quite the story during his time separated from the others. At least he had something to look forward to, then. Bruno leapt from the car through the open door, landing on one knee with a thud. He looked over at the citizen, and Skipper could already see 2 barely perceptible force fields hovering over Bruno's hands. He was ready to go. Dragon went to follow, but Musashi reached Auer and grabbed him by the arm, shaking his head. For a moment, it looked as if the cogitant was going to argue, but then his roaming eyes locked onto Skipper's. Those eyes were those of someone who'd been cornered. "Oh," Skipper nodded. "Do what you gotta do." After the briefest hesitation, Dragon nodded back, and then without further ado, the car dipped out of sight again, below the deck they were standing on. "They're going to get to the engine. Stop this ship blowing up the city," said Bruno by way of explanation. "But we couldn't just leave you up against this thing." Skipper grinned. Even though technically his physical situation hadn't much improved, the boost in morale was making him feel much better. "You're warming my heart here," Mr. Dell said. "Ruth, what do you say we take this guy out and finally get off this rock?" For a moment, Ruth had that old underlying anxiety written across her face. Fear of failure, maybe, or just fear in general, but it was quickly replaced by a genuine grin. "Yeah," she said, fangs poking out her mouth. "Let's fuck him up!" The metal fingers Ruth had destroyed and returned, hundreds of blades forming the new digits. The giant torso below Chael climbed for... I also kind of like Aether Awakening because it implies that Aether is like semi-sentient. Like it's kind of like its own living energy with its own intent. Because that's what it is. He became a vessel for it.
Into it a little bit, yeah.
Right, yeah. But it's like it retains that intent and becomes like semi-sentient in that way.
If you have no will, it will take over for you, basically.
Right. Scraping away the metal below it as it went. Chael roared, and the sound was like metal being torn about, high-pitched and grating. Even with 4 of them here, Skipper realized there was no guarantee of victory. This creature would do whatever it took to stop them from escaping. But that was no problem. After all, if it wasn't a fight, it wasn't a fight if you were guaranteed to win. And Skipper loved a good fight. Hang on. Ah!
Oh my god. It ran him through.
It's quiet, said Dragon, walking through the hallway. Musashi didn't reply. They'd landed in one of the Dawn House's open transport bays and encountered nobody. They'd moved through the entrance foyer and encountered nobody. Now they were moving through the hallways and still, they'd encountered nobody. This didn't make sense. Oh, they're gonna fight the Fifth Dead, aren't they? This is a setup for Fifth Dead. There'd been many guests invited to the Scala thing, hadn't there? The rich and powerful gathered in one place. Even if they'd been killed, there should have been bodies, but there was nothing. Not even bloodstains. Were they all recorded by Fifth Dead? They reached a maintenance elevator, the metal door incongruous with the intricate woodwork and furnishings that surrounded it. This had been a mining ship first, after all, fancied up later to suit the needs of high society. Aesthetic hadn't originally been a concern here. "We'll need to take it down," said Musashi suddenly, causing Dragon to almost jump out of his skin. "Engines are always near the bottom of these kinds of vessels." "Sure thing." His reply was neutral, a simple confirmation, maybe, that he'd heard the other person. At this point, Dragon didn't want to antagonize Musashi too much. It was no longer necessary. The doors to the elevator slid open, and the 2 of them stepped in, Musashi very deliberately standing behind Dragon. As they entered, Dragon heard another metallic roar from far away. Skipper and the others were still fighting that creature then, while he was stuck with the special officer. "Press the button for the engine room," Musashi said firmly. "Okay." Dragon tapped it, and a second later the lift shuddered into life, descending steadily. Maybe shuddered to life? The 2 of them stood there silently in the lift, the only sounds being the hum of the elevator's descent and the occasional beep of the controls. Dragon resisted the urge to hum a tune. This was possibly one of the most awkward elevator rides he'd ever experienced. He certainly hoped it didn't take much longer. "Why did you betray the supremacy?" Musashi said quietly from behind him, pulling Dragon back into the moment. Dragon didn't look back as he spoke. Sorry? He said, even though he'd heard Musashi perfectly well, more trying to come up with an acceptable answer that way. The supremacy. Why did you betray it? I find myself unable to understand. Explain yourself. Well, said Dragon, I had to go for the action that would benefit me the most. There's nothing to explain. It was nothing personal, you understand. Liar! Musashi snapped. I imagine a great many things you do are out of self-interest, but not that! Your betrayal has not profited you in the least. You've gone from a promising young member of the Admin Corps to a vagrant running from one planet to the next. Your position, your future, your entire life, you've thrown them away. And for what? Tell me, Dragon Hadrian, what have you gained? Dragon opened his mouth, but no words came out. What Musashi had said, he wasn't wrong. He'd lost everything and gained very little. The uneven calculus of a split-second decision. Not even a choice, really. He hadn't realized the decision was before him until he'd already made it. Why was it Dragon couldn't understand his own actions? It was infuriating. He could glance at someone like Musashi and get a fairly accurate read on what he was feeling, yet he couldn't understand his own emotions until they'd already betrayed him. It was like looking down to see your own body replaced with a dark blur. I'll show you, Ruth had said all that time ago in the Heart Building when they were going to save Skipper, that people can be good, that they're not what you think of them. Dragon shook his head. No, it couldn't possibly have been for such an idiotic reason as that. When Musashi spoke again, his voice was even quieter, like he was speaking to himself more than he was speaking to Dragon. I just wanted to save you. Why did you betray me? Dragon had nothing to say to that. Nothing but the truth. It was nothing personal, he repeated, his voice now a vague mutter. He found himself grateful that he wasn't a special officer of the eyes. Elevator went on down. I gotta say, I'm a little disappointed with this interaction. I wish there had been a bit more realization and rapport between them, because that was a really good fucking moment set up there. But to each their own. Maybe it'll come up again later. The Chael thing sent another metal fist lunging forward towards Skipper. Bruno projected a force field to block it, but the barrier quickly shattered. Still, it gave him time to dodge out of the way, letting the fist slam into the deck instead. The force of the blow caused the metal fingers to shatter into the blades that had formed it, but new ones formed almost instantly. The steel hand grasped blindly at the air. Destroying the hands won't do much, called out Skipper over the roaring wind and creaking metal. It can make more of them all at once! We gotta take out Chael if we want it to stop. Bruno bit his lip, looked up at the flesh crown of the beast. Chael's torso protruded from the neck of the metal monster, swaying from side to side, eyeless head snapping this way and that like a fly. It had a human body, Bruno knew, but the thing he was looking at was a creature of pure instinct. Going for the human section of the monster was easier said than done, too. Ruth had been trying it for the last few minutes, blitzing around the Chael thing at blinding speed, kicking off the deck to lunge towards the torso at blinding speeds. Blinding speeds?
Yeah.
Like a crimson bullet. Every time she made an attempt, though, a shield of blades would rise out of the monster's main... There you go. Monster's main body and block her path. Creatures of instinct excelled at defending themselves. Hesitation was born from thought, after all. Ruth can do it, Skipper said, as if answering Bruno's unspoken doubts. She's good like that, yeah? All you and me have got to do is keep Big Ugly here occupied. Easy, right? I would say remove the have, because have is kind of implied in the word gotta, unless you want to change gotta to got. Like, have got to do or gotta do. Because if you read it like, all you and me...
Not really.
Alright. Bruno looked up at the colossal metal giant, at the countless razor-sharp blades that made up its body, at the crackling thunderstorm of gray aether that raged around it. Easy wasn't the word that he'd use. Hey, Bruno, Serena said. Said Serena, casual as could be. Is it just me, or is the ship tilting? We have to hurry, said Dragon as he stepped out of the elevator, noticing the slight angle of the floor. I don't know how much longer we have before we start to dive. Musashi didn't say anything, just climbed out of the lift behind him. Well, that was fine. The special officer hadn't proven to be much of a conversationalist anyway. The engine room was cavernous, with the engine itself a colossal cylinder taking up much of the space. Rows of navigation consoles lined it on each side, blinking with blue lights as they did their work charting the ship's course. It should be easy enough to tell the ship not to blow up the city, Dragon said. I imagine. Musashi's elbow nudged him in the arm. Hadrian. His voice was firm. What? Dragon rubbed his arm, the slightest annoyance entering his tone. Look. Dragon followed Musazi's gaze off into the corner of the room, and realized what the special officer had noticed. There, nestled between two of the navigation consoles, Noelle was sat, rocking back and forth, hands clasped tightly over her ears, her teeth bared, her eyes so wide it looked as if the eyeballs might just pop out of their sockets. Her mouth was moving slightly wordlessly. Whatever mutterings she was letting out, they were intended for her and her alone. She was at the festival, Musazi pondered. She's here as well. She's here as well? Who is she? From what Dragon remembered, Noelle had actually told Musazi who she was, but he didn't say that. Not especially helpful. He looked Noelle up and down. She wasn't carrying any weapons, from what he could see, and no cyan aether was crackling around her. He supposed she could be using that aether cloaking thing, but he'd never gotten the sense that she was much of a physical threat on her own. Still, was it safe to approach her? She lost an eye and an arm the last time I saw her, Dragon muttered, neglecting to mention that it had been because he'd blown them off. He took a cautious step forward. Perhaps this is a trick, then, Musazi said, hand on his sheathed sword. Or a trap. Maybe, Dragon replied. But there was one way to check for sure. He let out an aether ping. His range with it was still pretty small, so he extended it as much as he could by directing it towards Noelle in a straight line. Still, the edges of it made contact with Musazi, and the special officer flinched as his own white aether sparked in alarm around his body. Noelle's aether did the same, cyan tendrils appearing for just a moment. Satisfied, Dragon focused his aether back into himself. If Noelle had been cloaking her aether, surely there'd have been no response at all. Likely it wasn't a trap, then. Dragon and Musazi approached cautiously, and when they were in front of her, Noelle's head suddenly snapped upwards, pupils flicking beneath the two of them. Or is it between the two of them?
Oh, between, yeah. The fucking autocorrect, it fucks me every time.
I didn't, she whispered, deliriously breathless. I didn't mean to. It wasn't me. It wasn't. What do you mean? Musazi said, looking down at her. Ever careful, his hand still hadn't left his sword. Noelle shook her head, still whimpering. The navigation, the console, the virus, it's too deep in. I couldn't do anything. We're dead. We're all dead. Shut up! That last bit was seemingly delivered not at them, but at one of the navigation consoles off in the distance. Virus, muttered Dragon, rubbing his chin. I guess that's how the sponsor of war is getting the ship on the path he wants. That might be tricky. Musazi looked to him, still keeping one eye on Noelle. How so? Well, I mean, Dragon threw his hands out. If it was the kind of thing where someone had just input a command into the console, that'd be one thing. But the systems aren't going to be working properly if this virus has fucked them all up. It probably won't even let the navigation codes be changed anymore. Musazi sighed, closing his eyes for the briefest moment, deep in thought. I love this gag. Then, couldn't you simply hack the system? Dragon felt his eye twitch. No, he said slowly, scathing annoyance dripping into his tone despite his best efforts. I can't hack the system. I wouldn't know how to hack the system because I'm not a hacker. If anyone was going to hack the system, it would have been her. But the fact that she's sitting here having a mental fucking breakdown presumably means she couldn't hack the fucking system! The special officer looked to him, brows creased. There's no need to grow enraged. It didn't help. Was there no other way we could stop the ship? Surely there are contingencies for these sorts of situations. An idea occurred. A bad, potentially suicidal idea, but worryingly, no other plans were appearing on Dragon's mind eye. I actually have a theory before we read further.
Yeah?
Shouldn't it be Dragon, not Dragon?
Fucking hell, this guy.
I thought that's what you were going to recognize. I think he's going to say they should just crash the ship, because, like, this is what I was thinking, too. Because then at least it won't aim for that, like, specific shaft, right?
Yeah, it won't Death Star it.
Yeah, so that's what I'm going to guess here. An idea occurred, a potentially suicide... Oh, right. He spoke haltingly, unsure. It was as if. It was as if his own mouth were reluctant to voice the concept. We could blow the engine up? Musazi's silence and his raised eyebrow was all the answer he needed, but unfortunately this wasn't the kind of situation where you could just give up. No, I mean it, Dragon insisted. The best way to make sure this ship doesn't fly into the central mine shaft is to make sure this ship doesn't fly, period. 100%. If we just make the engine stop working by blowing it up, that solves the problem. Easy peasy. I actually feel pretty smart now. Musazi wasn't convinced. Destroying a ship while we are in it does not strike me as you say, easy peasy. Well, that's because you don't have the resolve for it. Okay, Giorno. The special officer frowned. I have expansive reserves of resolve. It's simply that you suggest foolishness. How would we even destroy the engine? It's not as if we brought explosive equipment with us. Dragon looked around the room, his eyes settling on Musazi's weapon. Well, you use thrusters, right? Can't you just drive that sword all the way through the engine and mess it up that way? A sudden expression of mortal terror, incongruous with the suggestion, twisted Musazi's face, and he held the sheathed sword tight. No, he hissed, voice panicked. No, that is out of the question. With something else, yes, perhaps, but I will not risk luminescence. Dragon blinked. He understood naming your weapon for clout, but this kind of attachment to an inanimate object just felt weird to him. Wasn't the thing just made out of ordinary metal? Surely Musazi had the money to buy another one if it came down to it. Noelle spoke up from the floor, her voice crackly, hoarse. My drones, she whispered, staring down at the ground. They can detonate. Shut up! They can detonate their power supplies. If you open the engine up, they can fly inside and finish the job. She was shaking violently, even as she spoke. A few drones bopped. Even if they save the planet, though, with that logic, isn't all of its internet still fucked? And they'll have a giant ship blown up into them?
You know, these things happen.
Whatever it takes. A few drones bobbed weakly in the corners of the room like frightened birds. You want to help? Dragon said, not taking his eyes off the drones. He hadn't quite forgotten the feeling of plasma shots slamming against his skin. She shot him a chilly glare. I don't want to die. Dragon considered it for a moment, then he shrugged. Good enough. Musazi, if you're not willing to drive that sword through the engine, can you at least help me get the thing open? Musazi nodded, having already returned to his previous stoicity. Of course. Okay. Things had gone from bad to substantially less bad. They had a plan, at least, which meant they had clear wind conditions. Maybe you should inform the people up top about this plan before they start plummeting. That might be helpful.
Well,
you know how many problems in Aetheral space would be solved if Skipper simply bought Bluetooth headsets for the group?
They just broke out of prison. They don't have headsets.
If they could destroy the engine, they'd win. And if they couldn't, they and everyone else in the city below would lose as much as it was possible for a person to lose. Dragon moved over to the engine itself.
Every time I write moved, it autocorrects it to moves. I don't know why.
Yeah. Google's autocorrect has actually been pretty shit lately. Rubbing his hands over the smooth exterior. Before they went cutting chunks out of it, it was probably best to see if there was a switch or something. Some safe way to get the thing open. That would make things significantly easier. Summon! Commanded a... Oh, wait. Summon! No, I can't do that voice. Fuck, what's a good Fifth Dead voice?
It was just sort of like this. It's very deep.
Summon! Commanded a rumbling voice from the entrance. Penetration swordfish. Dragon whirled... It's kind of like a George Takei. Dragon whirled to turn around, but even as he did, he knew that he was far too slow to dodge what was coming. A lance of orange light surged towards him, so fast that he could catch only the barest impression of its shape, aimed right for his skull. It never hit its mark. Musazi appeared in front of him in a flare of white light. He'd moved at divine speeds, and smashed the projectile out of the air with a swing of his sword. Fragments of what looked like orange glass floated over the floor for a moment before dissipating into orange aether, which zoomed back into its master. The Fifth Dead stepped into the engine room, quarterstaff held in one hand, eyes looking impassively around the room. He glanced at Dragon, at Noelle, and at Musazi as if they were barely worthy of notice, like pebbles along the road. Inconvenient if you tripped, but not significant enough to worry about. There, he muttered to himself, and with that he pointed his... Three, he muttered to himself, and with that he pointed his quarterstaff towards Musazi, the greatest threat. It seemed that was all they were getting in terms of pre-battle banter. Musazi's eyes remained fixed on the Fifth Dead, sword clutched in a ready position in his hands. A wide aurora of aether stretched and compressed around him, his body ready to leap into action. As he faced down his opponent, he spoke to Dragon behind him. I will keep this enemy delayed, Hadrian. You and the girl do what you must to stop the ship, as quickly as you can. But, Dragon found himself worried despite his best efforts. You can't! Heed the Fifth Dead! I mean... Yes. Musazi adjusted his stance slightly. You strong. He took a step forward, approaching the massive man, and the giant did the same towards Musazi. Dragon could feel the tension crackling in the air. The stare-down would explode into combat any second now. It was inevitable. My name is Atoy Musazi, the swordsman said, raising his blade over his head. The sword shone incandescent with aether. Special Officer of the Supremacy. My sword's name is Luminescence. Prepare yourself, Revenant. Oh, does this imply that the deads are actually dead people brought back to life? Is that why he called him a Revenant? The Fifth Dead blinked. Die. Barely a second passed before blood struck the ground. Oh. No. No. If you kill Musashi off, I'm not reading Aetheral Space anymore. I'm ending the series on the channel. Just so you know. That's a threat.
I can't believe you have a Musashi stun.
Yeah, I want a Musashi fan can of like him with luminescence. It's like, you so fucking precious when you smile. Has Musashi smiled once this whole series? Maybe in the beginning when he thought Dragon was a good guy and he was briefing him.
I don't think he smiled back then. He was very businesslike.
I want to see Musashi smile. That'll be the biggest character development, is when like Marie says something and Musashi actually smiles and she's like, this guy! I've never seen him look happy before! He'd be like, my thanks. Luminescence thanks you as well.
He just starts talking to it.
Yeah, I mean, if Noelle can talk to objects, why can't Musashi? Can't believe Musashi has a crush on his sword. That's so based. I can't think of anything more based than that. Like, you've seen the swordsman, he's like, my weapon is an extension of myself, but I've never seen my sword as my waifu. It's extremely based. Alright, so, what's the question? Oh, I have a good one. Why the fuck is luminescence so important? Do you think it's really just, like, a nerd quirk of the character, or do you guys think there's some deep history behind it? And if so, what are your theories?
It's a good question.
Because that's been my main curious thing, because you've pushed it enough that it's clearly relevant, but you haven't pushed it enough that I don't know if it's, like, backstory relevant. So I'm wondering if it's like, oh, that's his quirk because he loves his sword so much, or if it's like there's some shit behind it, like his sensei died and handed it to him, and was like...
My soul is in the sword.
Yeah, my wife's soul is in the sword. Please take care of it. Oh, man. That'd be interesting. Luminescence, my love. Please, I could never destroy her. Oh, I love Musashi. If he dies, I'm not reading anymore. Just so you know. That was real. Also, speaking of Musashi, when's Marie coming back? She clearly survived. That's so... I hope Musashi and Marie joined the crew.
The last thing she knew was that Musashi was breaking out of prison present tense, so she may have just missed him.
I will say, and I'm sure, knowing you, that you'll reveal it later and you're just doing that thing authors like to do where they want to keep the secrets longer, but I really was hoping for... I didn't expect them to fully, like, have, like, a Dragon, like, instantly recognize everything the way he felt kind of thing, but I was hoping for a little more rapport from Dragon to, like, build up that relationship with Musashi again, or at least, like... to maybe have Musashi be like, maybe he's not such a traitor or something, but I was very disappointed that he was just like, I don't know. But,
he is not a person who likes talking about his feelings.
That's fair. I'm not saying it's like bad writing, just as a reader, I wish something more had come from that. But otherwise, this was a great chapter, and so was the last one. You're on a roll.
I can feel it, my Aether.
Coming in. My Aether Awakening, that is. I have an Aether Awakening every time I have to take Aetheral.
But yeah, that was 3.47.
Yep. Alright, everybody. Bye?
Bye!